How are you?
Oh, very well. Happy to be back, having another chat.
It's nice to see you. Last time I saw you was at We Will Rock You during one of your celebration parties. Now you've got the book out and the DVD. You've got your fashion line. You've got coasters with your picture.
Sorry, you caught me by surprise there for a moment. Yes, sorry to bleep your speakers with the loudness of my laugh. Yes, obviously my line in tattoos and genital jewellery is in every shop, and my perfume, Ode to Sweaty Ben, is rivaling Jade's, I believe. Yeah.
And you've got this new book out. Now, have you written it yourself? You'll be the first person this Christmas that I've spoken to who has actually written their own book.
Ah, yes, the glamorous world of the new novelist. We won't name any names, but yes, these kind of famous women, breast job women who write, whatever.
My first question to Kerry Katona. Yeah. Tell me about your new book. Well, I have to admit, I didn't write it. I thought that's probably not the best way to promote it, is it, really?
But I do admire her for that, actually, I must say, because I thought Jordan did a rather cleverer answer when Jonathan Ross asked her. She said, well, I don't type it, as a sort of which kind of... He didn't actually follow through, which I felt, come on, mate, come on, press her a little harder, but he let that go. Well, fair enough, it's a different world. No, of course, I write my books, and as if it requires an answer, and I love doing it. So what can I tell you? Yes, I've written it.
This season has been surprising, though. I do try and read or watch the DVD or listen to the CD when I'm doing these interviews, and it's been remarkable this year how many people have not been aware of what's been in their own books, DVDs or CDs. I find that surprising.
Well, I do too. If the sort of celebrity culture has got so far that you are genuinely interviewing sort of, a substantial minority of people who aren't really aware of the things that their names are attached to, then I do think that's a bit depressing. And I'll tell you what, I don't think it's healthy even for those who are currently coining it, because I really do think that celebrity for celebrity's sake is a dangerous thing to be messing around with. I think in the long run, you probably will find that the benefits do not outweigh the downside. Whereas if your celebrity helps you to express yourself as an artist, then I think then it's worth it. So I think promoting something you didn't write would be unbelievably hard, and eventually you would probably find the intrusiveness would get you. Whereas I'm perfectly happy because actually I'm here because I've got something to say.
It's always interesting to me as well when we get autobiographies that aren't written by the person. And I do wonder, therefore, how much of it's made up. Also, I noticed in Chris Moores' last book, there were 36 blank pages. What am I buying here?
I'm aware of the padding technique, and it does make me laugh, the second autobiography. Sharon, I've noticed, is on the sides of buses at the moment with the second autobiography. What's she doing? Lived another life since the last one was out. And it also says the next chapter. What is this going into the future? Is this the biography of what might be about to happen next? It is extraordinary, but clearly it's all about, a sort of endless marketing round. And as long as it doesn't distract, I suppose, people from perhaps finding books that are a bit more obscure. I'm lucky. Look, I am a celebrity author in that people know who I am. And so I have access to this kind of interview, and I can get published and tend to get some space in a bookshop, and that's fantastically fortunate. I think I fulfill that bargain by doing my best to write a really good novel that people want to read. But I'm well aware of my good fortune. The real problem with this massive plethora of, let's face it, nonsense that's being published is that it does squeeze the bookshops very hard. And I think for a new novelist or new writer of any sort, it'll be very, very tough, and it's getting tougher, particularly now that the supermarkets are into selling books. And, of course, I'm thrilled if the supermarkets stack my books. Obviously, I'm absolutely thrilled. But it would be very hard to be a struggling writer. And, I have nothing but sympathy. And I don't think that the sort of plethora of vanity titles is helping, but there's nothing you can do about it. You can't legislate against it. We live in a free country, and if the bird with the boobs wants to publish a novel, then there you go. If you can get someone to write it.
Your last book particularly focused on fame and becoming a celebrity, and how we're all obsessed now with being famous.
Well, it's difficult. This isn't a book remotely about celebrity. It's about lazy thinking, really, in the long run. It's about how I think we're increasingly living in a culture which feels that it has to respect respect any feeling. If somebody says, I believe it, or it's my faith, or I feel it, then instantly that somehow offers the moral high ground. For instance, if somebody says that they believe in Genesis and they would like their children to be taught the literal word of the Bible, we're all supposed to sort of see that as potentially, some kind of moral point of view. Whereas if I tell you I am a committed Darwinist because the evidence seems to point me towards the theory of evolution, there's almost something suspect about that. That's an intellectual point of view. That's not about feelings. I mean, the term post-Diana is a very, very overused one, but there's no doubt about it that the sort of the move in the media towards the respect of simply emoting. If somebody emotes, I'm sure Diana, for instance, was a very genuine person in terms of being, I'm sure, a very, very good-hearted person. But the idea that simply emoting a good heart changes anything or does anything, I think, is worthy of challenge. And yet nobody probably would dare challenge it these days. And the book is partly about that, about the idea that we are already in a society where faith is protected under the law, but my right to have my children taught evolution as demonstrable fact, which could be held up in any court of law because the evidence is clearly beyond reasonable doubt, is already considered suspect and could one day be challenged in the courts.
It's interesting how religion has always been a hotbed of debate through the centuries. And at what point do you have to be careful what you say? Were you careful when writing this book?
You talking about Islam? Are you talking about offending people and getting a fatwa on you? Well, obviously you are. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Fortunately for me, this book isn't about organised religion, and it certainly isn't an attack on Islam or Christianity. I have no argument with anybody's private faith. I have an enormous argument with anyone who seeks to impose their faith on me, or who claims their God is better than somebody else's God when I don't believe in either of them. But, as long within reason, I'm prepared to put up with it. And this book really isn't about that. It's more a book about lazy thinking. It's about a point at which we become our own gods. I mean, the enormous arrogance of modern thinking. I talk to God. People often talk about this now. I was talking to God. I had go and have a conversation with God. If there is a God, I really hope he or she has not got time to listen to every conversation with every person, particularly if it tends to be about their recording career. You constantly see, I thank God for giving me this talent, which I've brought to you, Simon. So no, I didn't have to be careful. Obviously, there's a massive issue in terms of freedom of speech and religious intolerance, because there's no doubt that, for instance, the BBC are considerably more fearful about offending Islam than they would be about offending Christianity. I mean, both are merely organised religions for me, and I respect people's right to follow them. I don't personally. And as I say, I hope they respect my right not to. But as I say, my book's sort of much broader than that. It's actually really about privacy in the long run. It's about the way we make of ourselves gods, and then almost we need to broadcast ourselves. We live in an emoting society. Everybody is encouraged constantly to talk about their feelings. Tell us how you feel. Phone in. Tell us how you feel. People are, on Big Brother, people sit around all day talking about how they feel, showing off their bodies. We're now all on MySpace and Facebook, all talking about what we did last night, what we think, how we feel, what's our boyfriend, what's our favourite meal, who would be our favourite dinner party companion. We're talking about ourselves the whole time, and I'm not sure we're doing a lot of thinking. And certainly, I think the novel is more about the rejection of privacy, the idea that privacy is almost something that one would be rather strange to desire. Why would you want to have a private life? Surely you want to talk about every aspect of yourself all the time on every medium.
What I took from the book was, what do I really believe, opposed to what am I supposed to believe? It made me think about my opinions and whether they are my opinions or the opinions that I think other people will approve of. And that's the big debate today, isn't it? We should all think the same.
Certainly, we're all being taught how to think. I mean, currently, without actually thinking. For instance, we all know that the N-word is a bad word. We certainly had that demonstrated to us very clearly on last year's Big Brother. And yet, there was a great deal of casual racism on the Big Brother that went unnoticed. The WI woman told Ziggy, who's Jewish, that told some of the girls, Ziggy will never choose any of you because their mums, Jewish mums, would only want rich professionals. This was a casual presumption that all Jews are interested in money and being professionals. It went completely unnoticed. And my fear over the racism debates that Big Brother throws up is they're not debates at all. They're just talking about what is the correct language to use. They don't ask anybody to challenge their real attitudes. I mean, if anybody really believes that silly blonde girl was a terrible racist, they're mad. I mean, she died, and has probably spent the rest of her life trying to pretend she isn't. So I think debate is strangled whilst we all learn how to behave. I think you're right about that.
So we're a novelist, we're a musical theatre writer, you're a stand-up comedian, you're multitasking across everything now. You've changed so much, haven't you? It's remarkable.
I don't think I have, really. In terms of musical theatre, some people have said, what a surprise, and some people have even said, isn't that some sort of sellout? This is an insane idea to me. I love musical theatre. I've always loved musical theatre. I know it's not a cool position to have amongst the sort of rock journalists of Britain. We have this strange, weird thing in Britain, which is not so common overseas, which is that you do judge people by their taste. If you like the Smiths, you're cool, and if you like Kylie, you're not. Well, these days, of course, you are, but there was a time when you weren't. I've never had any truck with that. I've never tried to be cool, and I'm well aware that I've never looked remotely cool. And I played the Artful Dodger when I was 12, and I loved musical theatre. 10 years ago, I was in sitcom. I was a stand-up. I was writing novels, and I was trying to get my first movie off the ground. I got it off the ground, and it's still my first and only movie. I always wanted to express myself as a writer in any medium that I could. And so I'm really doing the same job that I did the very first day I left university, and in fact was doing from the age of about 10 or 11, which is writing stuff and hoping to find an audience for it. The fact that I'm involved in a lot of medium is, I suppose, because I've got quite a lot of energy and quite a lot of ideas. But I don't think I ever do anything for the sake of it. I do it because I feel like doing it, and I think it'll be good. And of course, We Will Rock You was one of the best, most enjoyable projects I've ever been involved in, and I continue to be involved in it on an almost day-to-day basis, recasting and re-rehearsing the cast as they come in and out.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, how in this business they want you to do one thing. They don't want you to be a novelist and Blackadder and Thin Blue Line and Jew and comedian. They want to be able to say that's what he does. I think they then can't understand that you're multi-skilled and have an interest in different things at the very least. That kind of confuses journalists, doesn't it?
I do get some sort of things written which say what's all this about, but I obviously it's not my problem, really. It's theirs. I mean, for me, it is all much the same job. Everything begins for me with what I've written. For instance, I wouldn't really be interested in being a stand-up comedian doing other people's gear. I mean, that's one of my favourite comics were Morecambe and Wise. Their writer was Eddie Braben. They didn't write their stuff. So I respect artists that work that way, but that's not me. The only reason I would go on stage would be to perform my own stuff, because I've got stuff to say. I'm not interested in directing other people's plays. I think a lot of people would say, well, that's a curiously sort of funneled approach. But no, it's merely that I am a writer, and when I direct, I'm in a way extending myself as a writer, making sure that the way I see it is the way the audience see it. And if people feel that's not a democratic view of art, then I say whoever said art should be democratic. I please myself and I hope it pleases the audience.
We're going to go back to the book now for a little bit. One of the most disturbing things I saw on TV this year, and I don't know whether you happened to catch it, was The Hell's Kitchen with Marco and Jim Davidson and Brian Dowling.
Oh, I didn't see it, but I've read about it.
He was kicked off the show and deemed homophobic. This is what it touches on to me in this book, that if we don't think all in the same liberal, middle-class London type of way, we're suddenly an outcast.
I think, it's about attitude. You can clearly tell when somebody is being aggressive or homophobic and when they're not. I didn't see this incident. My point is the one I returned to that I made earlier, which is that although I do think it's important for us to publicly consider our behaviour, and I don't think you can just say anything, my problem is that we're getting into kind of knee-jerk reactions which don't address the real issues. Jim Davidson is clearly a sort of proudly unreconstructed blue-collar sort of fellow, and I doubt, maybe there'll be calls and people, I doubt that most gay people would consider him a kind of real homophobic threat. In a way, I think they probably think he does the cause of liberalism a great deal of good, because he sort of clearly is a bit Neanderthal. As I say, I didn't see the incident. I really don't know where the right and wrong lies in that one. But I did think in the sort of public hanging of the blonde girl whose name escapes me on Big Brother, we really demonstrated our lack of genuine analysis. Now, there was a point to have a real debate about the N-word, which we all know is used constantly by principally black artists, but also white artists like Eminem, in a culture which is celebrated by young people. This woman used it rather ineffectually. She looked rather silly. The word is wigger for a white person who's trying to look cool and like a rapper. And nobody discussed, where race and where that word lies. They just kind of strung this sort of silly 20-year-old out to dry. And there I think there is a problem. I mean, I have a great deal of time for what is sometimes called politically correct behaviour. I think we do need to censure and consider ourselves. But I think also it can actually replace proper thought and proper debate. And certainly in Channel 4's case, I think it did absolutely. Same thing goes for Jade. Here we have a clearly ill-educated, ignorant person desperate to show off. You put them on telly, goad them, and they get a bit ugly, and suddenly she's kind of, making up for everybody else's racism. I felt, as I think dear old Shilpa did, that it was all a bit weird the way that was spun outside of the house. Nobody could believe it. And I think there you have a real point. Debate is being replaced by a kind of knee-jerk vocabulary that ticks boxes.
The one thing that I draw from all of your writing and your live stuff is that you just want to make us think. Don't take things on face value. Throughout the entire DVD, what you do is address things and make us go, oh yeah, I never thought of that. Presumably that's what you try and do, is it?
Well, no. I mean, I think we've talked about this before. I don't try and do anything except express myself in an entertaining and thought-provoking way, but only from my own point of view. If I set out to make you think, then I don't think I'll achieve anything. I think that you'll spot me immediately, as somebody who's trying to make them think, and I'm not. I'm trying to express myself. I'm trying to express my own thoughts. Obviously, if that provokes your imagination and your intellect, and indeed on occasion your conscience, then I'm delighted. But I think if I set out to do that, then I would not only be highly patronising, but I'd be a bad artist. I might be a good politician. I don't know. I never chose to go into politics or campaigning of any sort, except in one small way as somebody who gets involved when one can. So all I'm trying to do is express myself, and the reason the things that interest me sometimes might interest you is because we're living in the same world, in the same community. I'm not trying to nail the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist nailing me every day and provoking me to think stories up, and that's the process. It starts with me and finishes with me.
You wouldn't bother writing it if you didn't want to make me think. I know you're too smart for that.
No, you're wrong. I want to make you yes, I want you to be intrigued, entertained, provoked, all the things that good art, if one always aspires to writing good art, whatever it might end up to be, all the things that good art does. But if you said let's take a great artist, let's take Picasso, you say, look, all you're trying to do you're trying to make me sensually provoked and enjoying your colours and intrigued by your shapes. He'd go, no, I was painting what I felt, and I'll leave it up to you what happens. So, yes, of course, if you start with the end of the product, if you see what I mean, the end result, then you could argue I was trying to do all those things, but I'm arguing to you that if I was trying to do them, they wouldn't work. Just as when you paint a picture, you can only do your best to create something beautiful. You can't think, what do people perceive of as beautiful? I'll paint that.
Yes, but We Will Rock You is there to entertain, which it does brilliantly. Your books are there, and it makes people think. That's all my point is. Did you take my point?
I mean, We Will Rock You does have a satirical core, which is sort of serious. It is very, very base. And actually, I think there is a point to be made about the fact that, globalisation of entertainment does probably disenfranchise the consumer a bit. You don't get so much choice, do you? But I'm not going to not argue this. When I read We Will Rock You, it's because I feel the inspiration to do so. When I write Blind Faith, it's for exactly the same reasons. I remember exactly the moment it happened. I was walking out in the country, walking our dog, which was not my idea, and there you go, but we've got one. And I just began to think about a world where feelings are considered sacrosanct, where merely saying that you just feel something and it's my beliefs gives you somehow a spurious moral high ground. I did not think I need to tell people about that. I need to make them think harder about that. I thought, oh, how interesting, how weird, and a story began to emerge in my mind. That's the honest truth. I can only speak as I feel.
You just said, I was walking down the street and I thought. By telling us your thoughts, you're making me think.
Okay,
all right. Let's go to a piece of... Look, this is not the first time we've come to blows, and I can feel it happening again today.
Happen. While the track's running, we're gonna fight.
We'll be back next with Ben Elton on your favourite local radio station. We're back on your favourite local radio station. It's Alex Belfield talking today to one of my favourite guests, because he always says what he thinks, and I'm going to ask you a few things. You can pass on them if you don't want to talk about them. What about Heather McCartney? Fascinating story. I could imagine that if you'd have done your DVD yesterday, you probably would have mentioned something.
I might have dealt with the treatment. I mean, I think what you've got there is a very kind of, sad story, but mainly because there's a little kid involved. Obviously, Paul McCartney's iconic to me. I think the Beatles weren't just the greatest band of the 20th century. I think they're probably the greatest popular entertainers of the 20th century. Ahead of Chaplin, for me, they did change the world. And so All I think is, let's get back to the music, I guess. I don't really have an opinion on that. I don't know whether I would have dealt with it on stage, partly because of my love of Paul and the Beatles so much, and also because I don't know what goes on behind closed doors, and I don't know what she's like. I met Paul a few times, but I never asked him what he's like with his girlfriend, so no, I probably wouldn't cover it.
So where's the line then? Because having watched your live DVD, you're there to be satirical, you're there to entertain and to make people laugh, and you do that. I've written down a few of the subjects that I enjoyed that you talked about. Chantel from Big Brother, Diana, Bob Geldof. What is the difference between talking about Heather or talking about Diana?
Oh, well, it depends whether I've got an attitude. My line on Diana was about conspiracy theories. It wasn't about Diana at all. It was about what I consider to be the iniquitous nonsense of all conspiracy theories. Men didn't land on the moon. Prince Philip murdered Diana. No motive, no reason. If you were going to murder someone, probably trying to drive them into a wall and hope they weren't wearing a seatbelt wouldn't be the most efficient way to do it. But nonetheless, we all feel there might be something to do. So we're all talking about it, and the consequences for democracy are catastrophic. I'm involved in the Get Out and Vote campaign. If we really have a generation growing up that think that a Labour government only elected 2 months before, I'm not going to vote. They'll only murder another princess. It'll only encourage them. So that was my line on Diana. What was a horrendous tragedy. You know, a young mother killed, kids deprived of their parents, has become a kind of endless gossip-mongering nonsense, in my opinion, and so my line was about conspiracy theories and the ridiculous nature of a murder plot which requires a suicide chauffeur. You know, I made the point, you know, MI5 is not Al-Qaeda. It's a bunch of ex-public school boys who were too thick to get into the city. My point about the royal family was this is a family that doesn't even have the influence to stop the Sun publishing transcripts of poor old Prince Charles having sexy talk with his girlfriend over his mobile phone. They have no influence at all. The idea that they could organise a murder is simply insane. They can't get anything that they want. So that was my line on Diana. My line on Chantel and Chanel and whatever was about the... I can't even remember what I was doing about them. I was doing about the nature of X Factor and the clear, obvious fact that, although she wasn't on it, but the obvious fact that Simon and Sharon and the other bloke don't audition 100,000 people, and I did a very, very funny riff about it. If I had an attitude towards the Mills-McCartney divorce case, I would certainly do a riff about it. I can't think of one as I speak, and so I'm saying I probably wouldn't do it. I wasn't talking about Diana, I was talking about us. I'm always talking about us.
I would challenge you on that slightly with the Mills-McCartney thing, because everybody's talking about it, and that's what you're brilliant at. You put your finger on it, and they're not talking about necessarily even the divorce or the child. They're talking about the fact that this lady goes on telly seeking publicity, and that's something not only you talk about in your previous book, but it would be in keeping with that list, wouldn't it?
If I did do a riff on it, it would be more about the idea that we are critical of somebody who goes on telly talking about themselves, when in fact that's all anybody's doing these days. We're on our Facebooks talking about ourselves, we're on our MySpaces. In fact, you know, Heather Mills-McCartney is an example of what life is about, which is basically going on telly and emoting. I mean, everyone would say, oh, she went mad, didn't she, the other night? She was screaming away on GMTV. That could easily have been spun as something rather splendid and brave if it had been under different circumstances, but she is designated media witch at the moment, so she ain't going to win, and I would have strongly advised her not to do what she did. But again, if I had done something on it, it wouldn't be probably about her, it would be about the way we see her. And again, it's about me as well. I'm reading the gossip. You point a finger and there's always three fingers pointing back at you, and I'm fully aware that I'm a part of the culture that I'm satirising, and I think that's why I can see what's going on moderately clearly, like most people can.
We're here today with Ben Elton for an exclusive hour-long programme. We'll be back next. We'll take another piece of music from We Will Rock You. One of my favourite tracks is a number they do about halfway through, which just brings the whole thing down to a beautiful crescendo.
No One But You.
No One But You. It's not one of the most famous songs by Queen.
It's one of the... it's the only single they ever released after Freddie died, and Freddie was not involved in the song at all because it was written by Brian about Freddie, and the remaining three members, including John Deacon, recorded it. I heard it on their... Heaven for Everyone album, and I just thought it was the most sumptuous and beautiful song. And as a lament to a dead hero, in Brian's case, Freddie was a friend and an inspiration to Brian, as they were to each other. And as you know, I place it in the context in the show as a sort of salute to all the rock heroes who died young for me, and, you know, John Lennon, very much so. But, you know, Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, Jimi Hendrix, there's so many. I mean, the list is endless. And it is a wonderful and an incredibly moving song, and proof, of course, that Queen were always a wonderful band, and they were all equally talented. And I'd love it if you'd play it, actually.
It's a tremendous song. It's called No One But You. It's from We Will Rock You. It's so beautifully sung, isn't it?
Yes, that was sung by Kerry Ellis, who played the character of Meatloaf. You'll have to see the show to find out why such a beautiful young woman would be called Meatloaf. Yes, Kerry Ellis. Now, I just saw in Wicked, utterly brilliant. I mean, British musical theatre has so many huge talents. We've been lucky to have many, many of them in We Will Rock You. And it does make me laugh when I see some of these talent shows. You know, I come to one of the auditions for Wicked, We Will Rock You, Mamma Mia, and you're going to see 200 people who'll blow your mind. I mean, that's our great sadness, is how many people we have to turn away.
And you really have got the pick of the crop. I just spoke to Connie Fisher this morning, and Michael Ball as well. I know you were at Hairspray the other night. It must be depressing to be an actor in musical theatre when you're competing with everybody. There's so few roles, and brilliance isn't even good enough.
Well, it is hard. There's no doubt. We see an enormous amount. We could always cast the show twice, and sometimes more often. There is an enormous talent base. We have great schools here. I mean, British musical theatre schools are terrific and turn out fantastically trained, disciplined people who work hard and have wonderful personality. I mean, the joy with We Will Rock You is that we use the individual personalities. We Will Rock You changes with each cast, and indeed wherever it's performed, because we mess around with the little jokes and local references, etc. And so it's wonderful to take somebody who's a brilliant singer and dancer and discover that they can act as well and can do comedy. Interestingly, who would have thought Michael Ball could do comedy? But he turns it a fabulous comic turn in Hairspray. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talent, and as always, sadly, you can't give all of them a job. I wish one could.
How do you decide who gets the job? Because there are so few Leannes in Hairspray, Kerrys in Wicked, Maz Murrays in We Will Rock You. Are there many personalities coming through? That's what I'm asking.
Yes, there are. We see a lot. We have wonderful new Scaramouche in We Will Rock You, Sabrina Alouche, and we also have a lovely new Galileo. There's a lot of talent. One of our first Scaramouche, Hannah Jane Fox, is going to be starring in the Hackney Panto this year, which I think is great. It's the greatest panto in London. So you do see talent does out, and a lot of talent, as I say, we have seen, and it's the way we cast is, you know, Brian, Roger, and myself attend all the final auditions. I mean, obviously, a casting director does the initial work and then comes up with a last, say, 50 people, and then we work through them, and you know, we look for the biggest voices and the most sparkling personalities, and we work with them. It's like any casting process. And as I say, sometimes, you know, you wish you had another job. Occasionally you think, oh, we haven't found the right person. It can happen too, but we've been very lucky with We Will Rock You.
Let's talk very finally about your life today and being you. Presumably you spend a lot of time writing the books, because they're not written by somebody else for a start, which is rare. Writing musicals, writing books, doing stand-up comedy. Do you have a favourite, or are you just glad to do different things at the same time?
It's all writing for me, and I do feel, you know, truly blessed, although only by Mother Nature, me not being a religious person, truly fortunate that I've been able to make a living all my life doing exactly what I want to do. My job is my hobby, and my hobby is to write comedy, to create stories. The wonderful thing that I've been able to move into direction and into theatre, so I get to work with all these wonderful other talents. You know, I really have a very fortunate life. But my real life is, of course, at home, my wife and children. And what I'm definitely going to be doing tomorrow is buying the currants, the raisins, and the suet to get my Christmas mincemeat going. Because frankly, I'm a little late already, because it needs to age.
Is it great being you today in terms of your reputation? Because you really have been the backbone of comedy for so long now, certainly for my generation. And then today doing the books and all these different things. People make jokes about you now, and you've become the institution that almost you were criticising before. It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I used to have a pop at Tarby, and I get people having a pop at me. The only difference I'd say is Tarby had to go first in my generation. He had a real slag of me when I first started, and I spoke back in kind. I haven't really slagged anyone off myself of late, but you do have to accept that if you are in the media, as I am, and you've been around for so long, you know, people will have a pop, and that's perfectly fair enough. I am so in such a great position that I can write a book and you will talk to me about it. Most authors are listening, thinking, if only I had the chance to let it on get published, but to get out and publicise it. I'm well aware that my television celebrity has given me an enormous shop window for my art, which I love. And so any downside, I would be very churlish if I did anything but shrug my shoulders and say, that definitely comes with the territory.
I don't see many bad reviews for your books. It's interesting that they might slag you off for all kinds of things, but you're very well received as an author. Do you almost expect to be criticised now? For example, We Will Rock You was universally panned. I think I was probably the only one who stood up and said, this is the best night out in theatre that you'll ever have. They were absolutely vitriolic in their hatred for it.
We were shaking. I went into the theatre the next day and you got like 35 kids who are on stage every night. You got a 10-piece live band. You got, 100 crew and everyone everyone was like, Walking Dead. Nobody could believe it because we'd had, standing ovations. Everyone was loving it. And the critical, look, everyone always says this, the critics seem to be at a different show. We've all heard it and you can't whine about it. But it was one of those occasions. Nobody could believe the intensity of the anger and the actual hatred we seemed to have provoked. And it obviously came down to the fact that, Queen and Ben Elton, we're not going to let them get away with this. And, the truth of the matter is it's an incredibly expensive show. Almost everything you spend on your ticket you will see returned to you live on stage. Queen would never give anything but a full-scale show. You've only got to, watch what they did when Freddie was alive to believe that. We're very proud of it. And, of course, people sometimes say, you got the last laugh, you're in your 6th year. And, of course, that is very satisfying. But I have to say, it was a terrible morning, and all you could think about was all the people who had to go on stage at night, because they literally were coming up to us and going, why? What did we do? And all Brian and Roger and I could say was, well, it's not you they're having a go at, don't worry, because it was us.
And how do you take that personally? Can you shrug it off at this point? I mean, you've been through the mill. You know it's about you.
Of course you do. And look, nobody can ever hear somebody being unpleasant about them without being hurt. If you, no matter how confident you are, you overhear someone on a bus going, I think he's a hypocrite. Now imagine a million people reading that. Because obviously every time anybody ever reads a review, they think they've misunderstood me. That's not me. They're reviewing a different person. Everyone thinks that. And so the only answer, and I say this to any young artist out there, is don't read it. You have to not read reviews because, sure, you might learn something from them, but the dysfunctionalism that you'll end up getting, endlessly writing letters of rebuttal, that wasn't what I was doing, you don't understand me. So the trick is to just say, well, that's their job, you do yours, I'll do mine, and we'll meet at the end of the road and probably shake hands on it.
I'm so grateful that the public kept going, and I think it was purely word of mouth.
It was
because of the standing ovations.
They cut our business to shreds. Reviewers do have power, they really do, particularly since now the media, because it feeds so much on itself. These days reviews are re-reviewed. So what are the papers saying? Literally. And of course then it's all on the net and it never ever goes away. And it did. We were sort of shredded. And I mean, instead of having a glorious opening night, our box office died the following day. But fortunately, the word of mouth was terrific and we got a little bit of help from the Queen. The Queen helped Queen because we had the Jubilee concert, which we'd been booked to perform at, Queen and the cast of We Will Rock You, and it was just a lucky coincidence that we were able to say, hey, we're here, we're proud, we got great music, and we look kind of good too. And I think that did help. But the real thing was the word of mouth, and in the long run, that's the most satisfying reviews of all, of course.
It may not be Shakespeare, it may not be the most mind-provoking show in the world, but it is the best fun you'll ever have in a theatre. And I've seen most in Vegas and everywhere. It is just tremendous.
Mate, well, I've got to say, I was there only last night, and we were up swaying our arms with champions, just as we've done for 5.5 years. So thank you for that.
Congratulations on the book. Blind Faith is in the stores now. It's never going to stop, is it? People are never going to agree on religion.
No, I don't think that the answers are going to be easy, but I do believe that anybody who has genuine faith should be able to consider other people's faiths and consider the fact that they may be all interpreting the same God, and that God is merely an interpretation of the mysteries of the universe. Don't get me wrong. I know that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in my philosophy, and I'm happy to call them God. Where I've got a problem is when people invent a God in their own image and say, God is saying what I want to say. And the terrifying coincidence that the man-made disaster of global warming, which will provoke flooding, is also reminiscent of the biblical disasters of God's vengeance, is really the basis of my book, because I do think that socially we are going to have a big problem. We already had priests and bishops saying, it's because of our attitude to gays, it's because of this and that, when we had flooding last summer. And I think that the floods will unleash a wave of fundamentalism, and that's what the book's all about. Sounds a bit depressing, but there's a few laughs in it.
Congratulations on the book. Blind Faith's in your store now. The DVD's in the store now. The Ben Elton Brussels sprouts are in Sainsbury's right now. You've got the coasters and you've got the tea caddies.
No Brussels sprouts, mate. It is one thing I will not countenance. I have to cook them at Christmas because I do the Christmas dinner, but I do myself frozen peas.
It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much, Ben Elton.
My pleasure.
The Alex Belfield In Conversation podcast with daisymedia.co.uk.